Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And good afternoon. His Excellency, Mr. Ambassador Rahmat Pramono, Ambassador of the Republic Indonesia for Kazakhstan and Tajikistan in Nur Sultan, Honorable Minister Counselor and Deputy Head of Mission at the Royal Thai Embassy in Nur Sultan, Dr. Paradorn Rangsimaporn, Honorable Professor Badri Munir Sukoco, Director of Postgraduate School at L.L.M University, and our partner from Naribaya Kasku University, Dr. Shynar Zakiyeva, Head of International Office, Kasku University, and also honorable speakers, both from Kasku, Dr. Ikboljon, and from L.L.M University, Dr. Rosa, all distinguished guests and respected participants. Welcome to the International Collaboration Virtual Seminar. Ladies and gentlemen, I am Radian Salman, the moderator of our today's seminar. I'm very pleased to see you here and welcome all of you to this continuing collaborative seminar between L.L.M and Kasku. And I want to say again that the seminar is conducted by Postgraduate School L.L.M University and Kasku University with fully support from Embassy of Republic Indonesia in Kazakhstan and Tajikistan. This seminar will discuss, as you know from the flyer, is about comparative regionalism in and for Asia, with specific issue on Central Asian, Eurasian, and Southeast Asian. Ladies and gentlemen, since globalization and international relations has been grown many decades, every country seeks to initiate change to expand their economic activities. And of course, with one or with a single purpose to get more and more benefit, not only in the field of trade, but also tourism, culture, maybe including education and etc. But then the question is, what is change, opportunity, and also obstacle from perspective of comparison, including maybe from legal perspective. Ladies and gentlemen, as I have a list of agenda, I wouldn't make introductory speech longer, because I have here everything actually in pair. We have two opening speech, we have two keynote speaker, and also we have two speakers. So everything in pair except for moderator. So I would like to start with opening speech from the host of this collaborative seminar, Professor Badri Munir Sukoco, Director of Postgraduate School at L.L.M University. Professor Badri, time is yours, please.
Thank you, Dr. Radian Salman. The Honorable Excellency, Dr. Rahmat Pramono, the Ambassador of Republic Indonesia in Kazakhstan and Tajikistan, Nur Sultan, Kazakhstan, Dr. Paradorn Rangsimaporn, Minister Counselor and Deputy Head of Mission at the Royal Thai Embassy in Nur Sultan, Kazakhstan, Dr. Shynar Zakiyeva, Head of International Office of Naribaya Kasku University, and two speakers of this event, Dr. Ikboljon Qoraboyev, Associate Professor of International Relations, Kasku University, and Dr. Rosa Ristawati, Associate Professor of International Law, Universitas Erlangga. And also Vice Director, Head of Study Program, student, alumni, and all stakeholders who join this event. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And good afternoon, everyone. The L.L.M International Forum is a webinar money program presenting national and global experts, discussing a specific topic, exploring the wisdom and solution for the nations. By discussing best practices from different nationalities, the best solution will emerge for both countries. Right now is three countries, Kasku, Indonesia, and Thailand. Today's event is the second event that we conduct and get support from the Embassy of Republic Indonesia in Kazakhstan and Tajikistan, as well as from the Honorable Excellency Ambassador. And it is also the second event to implement our memorandum of agreement between Universitas Airlangga and the Kasku University of Kazakhstan. We wish our students and alumni can learn best practices from Indonesia, Kazakhstan, and Thailand on the issue of comparative regionalism in and for Asia, Central Asia, Eurasian, and Southeast Asian perspective. By understanding that, then we can follow up by realizing the potential of Greater Asia, as mentioned by Professor Parakhana in his latest book, as the next economic locomotive growth, as well as each country for the betterment of society, not only for economy, but also social, political, laws, ideology, and etc. Last but not least, this is another stepping stone, even for our collaboration with Kasku University and Kazakhstan universities. We will reciprocally support each other by conducting guest lectures, staffs, and student exchange, as well as joint research. So please give big applause to all the honorable speakers, and thank you to all of the participants, particularly to our international partnership unit who make this event happen. Once again, thank you and have a wonderful and insightful forum. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam. Thank you, Professor Badri Munir, for opening speech, and I think warm welcome for us and warm welcome for continuing this collaboration with Kasku. For the second opening speech, I would like to invite Dr. Shynar Zakiyeva from Muhammad Naribayev, Kasku University. Dr. Shynar, please.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, dear colleagues, distinguished speakers, participants. Welcome to today's international webinar. Well, we signed cooperation agreement with Airlangga University about 3 months ago, and already having a second webinar, very intensive. So on behalf of Kasku University, I would like to extend our gratitude to Airlangga University for being proactive, for their proactive approach and for this initiative. Also, using this opportunity, I would like to, as a former diplomat, I would like to extend my gratitude to His Excellency Rahmat Pramono, Ambassador of Indonesia to Kazakhstan, and Dr. Paradorn Rangsimaporn, Minister Council of the Embassy of the Royal Thai Embassy in Kazakhstan, for finding their time to join our session. It's an honor to have you today. I believe that organization of such events is a great opportunity for students of both Airlangga and Kasku University to listen to experts and discuss wide range of issues that are high on international agenda. The topic that is to be discussed today is of great interest, especially in this challenging time, I would say post-pandemic world. So I hope that today we will have a very fruitful discussion. I wish everyone a good day and interesting discussions today. Thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Shynar, for your opening speech. I hope weather in Kazakhstan and here will very good to give us a spirit for discussion via this Zoom meeting. The second agenda in my list is a speech from our keynote speaker. So we have two keynote speakers. First, His Excellency Mr. Ambassador Rahmat Pramono. And then we have also Honorable Minister, Counselor, and Deputy Head of Mission at the Royal Thai Embassy in Nur Sultan. Once again, it is our honor to have both of you here in this Zoom meeting. First, I would like to invite His Excellency Mr. Rahmat Pramono to give a keynote speech. Please.
Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon to all participants of this webinar. Yang terhormat Bapak Profesor Badri Munir Sukoco, Ph.D, Director of Postgraduate School, Universitas Airlangga, Dr. Shynar Zakiyeva, Head of International Office of Kasku University, my ASEAN colleague, Dr. Paradorn Rangsimaporn, Minister Counselor, Deputy Head of Mission of Royal Thai Embassy Nur Sultan, Dr. Ikboljon Qoraboyev, Associate Professor of International Relations at Kasku University. Yang saya hormati Dr. Rosa Ristawati, LL.M dari Postgraduate School of University of Airlangga, and Dr. Radian Salman, LL.M. Distinguished participant, first of all, I'm pleased and honored to take part at this joint virtual seminar between University of Airlangga and Kasku University for the second time. And I shall commend both universities for showing their committed effort in implementing the MOU of cooperation through this kind of collaborative activity. I am also particularly glad that today's webinar brings about the interesting topic that hasn't been widely discussed in Indonesia and probably also here in Kazakhstan. So my speech or keynote speech will be taken mostly from the experience that I had working with ASEAN Department for almost 16 years, culminating by my appointment at the time as Ambassador of Indonesia to ASEAN from 2014 to 2017, before coming here as Ambassador of Indonesia to Kazakhstan and Tajikistan. So hopefully I can manage my keynote speech in a relatively short period. I was given about 15 minutes. Okay, this is the outline of my speech, my keynote speech, approaching this topic. I will talk first about regionalism in Southeast Asia and Central Asia, the strategic importance of Eurasia, Central Asian countries amidst the interest of major power, a perspective from the outside, the regionalism approach of ASEAN, and closing. Let me start with the first section, regionalism in Southeast Asia and Central Asia. If we talk about regionalism, regionalism is a broad subject in the international relations studies that I believe will never be exhausted to explore. There are various theories to understand behavior of state actors in their relation with others, including their decision to engage with the international coalition or cooperation, such as the establishment of a regional bloc. Those theories, however, would not satisfy our curiosity without having an adequate knowledge and understanding on the context of the subject that we study. From my reading and experience, regionalism in Central Asia is rather complex compared to that in Southeast Asia. Whenever one talks about regionalism in Southeast Asia, usually ASEAN will be easily the first that comes to mind. Even today, it becomes more common for us to use ASEAN and Southeast Asian interchangeably, as all ASEAN countries except Timor-Leste have now been members of ASEAN. It is true that we are part of bigger region if you want to mention about East Asia, which encompasses both Southeast Asia and Northeast Asia, or the broadly defined Pacific or Indo-Pacific region. Nevertheless, ASEAN outlook is mostly put at the front by Southeast Asian countries whenever they engage with broader regionalization process. However, it is hardly the case in Central Asia. There are several active platforms of regional cooperation which involve the participation of countries in Central Asia, including Commonwealth of Independent States, Eurasian Economic Union, and Shanghai Cooperation Organization, to name a few. Institutionalized cooperation platforms that I just mentioned, however, refer to a wider region, while the genuine Central Asian organization is currently no more. I understand that previously there was the Central Asian Economic Cooperation, which then transformed into Central Asian Cooperation Organization, but then Russia was admitted in 2004 and it was no longer pure Central Asian Organization. The organization itself was then incorporated to the Moscow-led Eurasian Economic Community and was finally dissolved in 2005. Since then, there hasn't seemed to be much effort to revive the genuine Central Asian platform of cooperation, which is free from the involvement of external stakeholders or major external power. Let me go now to the part 2, the strategic importance of Eurasia. Throughout the history of Eurasian region has held geopolitical and geostrategic importance even way before the modern era. Needless to say, it is, and as history showed us, the presence of great power will further attract another great powers. Allow me to refer to a famous thinker and geographer by the name of Sir Halford Mackinder. He was a prominent British geopolitical thinker who argued through his notable article entitled The Geographical Pivot of History, written and published in 1904, that the key to global hegemony was to control the heartland, which he referred the heartland of the Eurasian landmass. The heartland, according to Mackinder, is the greatest natural fortress on Earth, surrounded by geographical formations such as ice polar sea, river, forest, that keeps it sheltered and hardly exposed from the external attack. Although if you put it in the current context, one may argue that the advancement of technology in communication and transportation, it is no longer a big issue today. However, a combination of such geographical formation and abundant resources of the heartland become great incentive for the growth of a mainland power, which has the capacity to expand beyond the region. Mackinder underlined the importance of connectivity across the heartland, notably through the land-based transportation route. He believes that in the case of a clash with a sea power, the continental power would eventually prevail. Further, in 1942, Nicholas Spikeman, American strategist and professor of Yale University, shares Mackinder's view on the importance of the heartland by adding a note on the vital role of the inner crescent of the heartland, or the rimland, as he called it, as the gate of the heartland to the outside world. Spikeman argued that who controls the rimland rules Eurasia. Who rules Eurasia control the destiny of the world. Both Mackinder and Spikeman's perspective on geopolitics have apparently influenced grand strategy of the world's most major power and the attitude toward the Eurasian landmass, including the development of the containment strategy, which was very popular in the 20th century, and particularly during the Cold War era. If they are unable to dominate the region, at least they could prevent the other power or coalition of power to control the region. This is the theme, actually. In the 1980s, Zbigniew Brzezinski, a US National Security Advisor under the Carter administration, stated that whoever controls Eurasia dominates the globe. If the Soviet Union captures the peripheries of this landmass, it would not only win control of the vast human, economic, and military resources, but also gain access to the geostrategic approaches to the Western Hemisphere, which is the Atlantic and the Pacific. So let me turn now to how ASEAN engagement so far with this region. ASEAN has always keen to develop engagement with other regions and international organizations. ASEAN has partnership with GCC, Mercosur, Pacific Alliance, EU, United Nations, SAARC, etc. In April 2004, Secretariat of ASEAN and Shanghai Cooperation Organization signed a memorandum of understanding to undertake cooperation in the areas of transnational crime, economic, environment, social development, and energy. And on 14 November 2018, ASEAN and the Eurasian Economic Commission have signed an MOU on economic cooperation. Both parties are now studying the possibility of having a full FTA. While bilaterally, ASEAN countries, some of the ASEAN member countries, have concluded FTA, such as with Vietnam, and soon will ratify agreement with Singapore. While on the other hand, Indonesia is currently working to negotiate FTA with the AREU. I believe that expansion of the AREU partnership is part of Russia's vision on greater Eurasian outlook. At the first international seminar for EAEU and the ASEAN countries expert in Moscow on December 2019, Mr. Sergei Glaziev, Minister in charge of Integration and Macroeconomic of the Eurasian Economic Commission, mentioned the urgent task of EAEU and ASEAN to establish new interaction format, including in developing the ideas of greater Eurasian economic partnership. From the pragmatic point of view, the free trade agreement between the two regional economic blocs indeed promises and will signify boost to boost the economic of scale, as it would combine the 651 million population of ASEAN with 183 million population of AREU with a total GDP of around 8 trillion US dollars. Let me now move to the third part, the Central Asian countries amidst the interest of major power, perspectives from the outside. Back on focusing to Central Asia countries, there is a question of how to understand their position with regard to regionalism. I believe there are various factors shaping Central Asia's role in the world, and among others are the geographic location, which is close to major regional power, Russia and China, the abundant resources in the Central Asian and Caspian state, perception of threat and security challenges, and geopolitical interests of the major power. Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Turkmenistan were part of the Soviet Union. In the post-Soviet era, any sort of regional cooperation among them, as well as with Russia and other former Soviet countries, would rather be considered as a reintegration rather than unintegration. As relatively new independent countries, it would be well understood if some of the Central Asian countries would seek new direction in their international outlook and carefully engage with Russia. There have been attempts by Central Asian countries to abandon Soviet legacy in the various aspects and reinvigorate their own national values. I particularly noticed this trend during my 4 years tenure as ambassador in this region. Let me start with Kazakhstan. In various functional aspects, as it seems among others in its 2050 strategy, it is clear that Kazakhstan aims to emulate the path of the Western developed partners and embracing Western value. Kazakhstan envisions itself on the road of modernization and has set an ambitious goal to be member of OECD and be in the top 30 developed countries by 2050. Kazakhstan is now undergoing transformation in education sector to catch up with the European standard, while on the renewable energy sector, banking system, trade and investment, Kazakhstan is gradually learned to adopt international standards developed in the West. It has been actively engaged in various international fora beyond its region, such as through the UN bodies and OIC. I believe it sends a very positive message that Kazakhstan wishes to extend its interaction with as many as possible actors, and thus want to be seen standing independently despite its close engagement with Russia. Sharing borders and located between the major powers of Russia and China are both a blessing and a curse for Kazakhstan. The fact that it has no direct physical connection with the West, that isn't much to choose from Kazakhstan compared to Ukraine, for example. While Russia is traditionally ally and partner, and China's Silk Road project is lucrative, managing mutual relations with Russia and China while observing the dynamic of relation between the two would be of Kazakhstan's best interest for the time being. The same with Kyrgyzstan, a relatively small country in the Central Asia, while it shares long borders with China, is landlocked and is geographically close only to Central Asian neighbors, with occasionally they have some tensions. In this case, Russia is expected to be serve as a balancer. Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and Turkmenistan, however, can be regarded as slightly different. The three countries do not share border with Russia, and only Tajikistan has a border with China. However, they are close, not less important players in the region: Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India. While facing constant threat of terrorism and religion extremism, they could find a balance in a close observation from the US. Question that I often heard is why regionalization is lacking in Central Asia. Perhaps this factor contribute to that. First is different national interests and economic development, lack of leadership from intra-regional cooperation, lack of economic incentives for economic integration, security challenges such as terrorism, religion extremism, situation in Afghanistan, illegal drug trafficking, transnational crime that discourage integration. And then internal issues such as transborder water sharing, border dispute that still exists among some of the Asian countries. We observe the latest development over the initiative of the Uzbekistan second president, Shavkat Mirziyoyev, who proclaimed that Central Asia will be the priority of Uzbekistan foreign policy. And there have been consultative meetings at the summit level of the 5 leaders of Central Asia. The first summit meeting was in Astana, second one was in Tashkent in November 2019, and the third one supposed to be in Bishkek in October 2020, but was postponed due to the pandemic. Although the leaders gathering are very much welcome, there has yet any significant move in the Central Asian inter-regionalization process. Citing a comment by Farhad Tolipov from Central Asia Caucasus Institute, who wrote that Central Asia integration takes one step forward and one step backward. So how these two regional approaches from Central Asia and Southeast Asia can be compared? How can we learn from each other? Well, ASEAN is just one of various existing models of regional integration. Different to the case of Central Asia, which began the regional integration with a divorce, ASEAN member states did not previously have such a strong connection with each other, except for some countries that share the historical and cultural background. Compared to Central Asian countries, ASEAN countries are much more diverse. The relations among ASEAN member states are not always without tension. Before and after the ASEAN was established in 1967. However, not only could ASEAN survive almost 54 years, but it has been growing strongly internally. The question now is perhaps what contributes to the success of ASEAN? First, I believe, is the leadership of Indonesia. Being the biggest country in Southeast Asia with a population of currently over 270 million, Indonesia could easily be perceived as a threat to others in the region. But it is not. Of course, the situation is different in the 50s and the 60s, where during that time, the policy of Indonesian government is quite, I can say, proactive and sometimes threatening to other countries in the region, to our neighbors. But since the late 60s, early 70s, the approach of our government is different. So we now embracing approach of cooperation instead of conflict. And this is very much true in the within the ASEAN context. And then the second one is fully equal relation among members. Member countries of ASEAN is consisted of big and small countries. And all big and small countries have similar rights and obligations. ASEAN strategy on regional integration, which comprises 3 pillars, is also important and contributing to the success of ASEAN, because we give attention at the comprehensive approach of political and security, economic, community, and social and cultural cooperation. The fourth one is confidence-building measures that are kept being promoted intra-regionally and with the external partners, with our external partners such as the US, Russia, China, and other ASEAN partners. And then the ASEAN ways and value, consensus, respect for sovereignty, non-interference, peaceful dispute settlement, renunciation of the use of force toward each other is very important for us to get together better within ASEAN. ASEAN outward vision beyond its region, with ASEAN in the driving seat, that bring incentive for the members to strengthen the ASEAN cooperation, is also seen as an important factor. Compared to other similar region cooperation platforms such as EU or the AREU, some people might consider ASEAN is too slow on their progress and sometimes not responsive to the current and emerging issue. It might be true in a certain extent, considering that ASEAN was for a long time a somewhat loose platform of integration, just an association without a formal legal status until the Charter was signed in November 2007. Its ambiguous value of respect for sovereignty and non-interference might also be occasional a firm common standing in the wake of domestic crisis in its member state, such as what currently happened in Myanmar. However, it is clear ASEAN will not be transformed to a supranational body in the near future, such as example of EU. The motto of one vision, one identity, one community might also be a mere jargon rather than actual reality. But nevertheless, ASEAN has proven itself to be functional for member states and has been accredited as an honest broker for external partners. In closing, I would not give any conclusion, since academic conversation is an unending dialogue. However, at this point, I'd just like to say 2 things. Regionalism is a multidimensional and dynamic subject of research that can be studied through various perspectives. There is no magic formula that can be applied universally to build a successful regional cooperation. We could and should learn from each other. Again, I'm happy to be invited at this virtual seminar. I would like also to learn from other distinguished experts that present today, and I will be happy to follow the discussion of this topic in the future. I believe this event will enrich our understanding toward each other between Indonesia and Kazakhstan, as well as between ASEAN and Central Asian countries. And it certainly gives valuable contribution to our effort in promoting better relations with our international partners. Thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you very much, His Excellency, Mr. Ambassador. I think presentation and keynote speech from Mr. Ambassador, a very interesting and comprehensive view, starting from geopolitical theory into empirical evidence based on policy and identification on factor for shaping and also threat in regionalism in Central Asia, as well as a view about Asian values. But I would like to underline among those factors for shaping and also threat, I find one of the key words in regionalism is a leadership. So this is also actually in line with our vision and mission in postgraduate school in the issue of leadership. But anyway, thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. For the second keynote speech, I would like to invite our neighboring country from Thailand, Honorable Minister Consular and Deputy Head of Mission at the Royal Thai Embassy in Nur Sultan, Dr. Paradorn Rangsimaporn. Time is yours, please.
Thank you so much. Your Excellency, the Ambassador of Indonesia, and distinguished guests, participants, speakers. It's an honor to participate in this webinar, and my congratulations to both of your universities for your MOU. And Thailand also hopes to have such an MOU between our educational institutes with KASKU and other Kazakh universities as well in the future. I'm not sure if you can see the presentation or the PowerPoint. Is clear? Okay, great. So before I begin, I would like to stress that I'm speaking in my personal capacity, and these are my personal views and not that of the Thai Embassy or the Thai government. My talk does not address the issue of regionalism as such, but it looks at Kazakhstan's relations with Southeast Asia and ASEAN, which is one successful model of regionalism. And it examines the key points for greater engagement between Kazakhstan and ASEAN, and including in the post-COVID-19 world. And we can summarize this into 7 key points. Oops, sorry. Sorry, some technical. Okay. Okay, can you see it? Great. So firstly, Kazakhstan sees ASEAN as a large market to access with a population of approximately 656 million people and a combined GDP of 3,166 billion in 2020. So ASEAN is a vast and very largely untapped market with a lot of potential for Kazakhstan. So, and some individual ASEAN countries like Indonesia, with a population of around 270 million people, and Vietnam, with a population of nearly 95 million people, are seen as vast, large markets just by themselves. And for ASEAN countries, Kazakhstan is seen as the most possible strategic partner in Central Asia, due to it being the largest and most stable economy in the region, and it has an abundance of natural resources, including oil and gas. It also has the most advanced and developed transport and logistics infrastructure in the region, and can be ASEAN's entry point into the wider Central Asian market of around 73 million people, with a combined GDP of around 286 billion US. Second point is that Kazakhstan-ASEAN economic links can also be enhanced through the EAU, and the Ambassador of Indonesia has already touched upon this. And of course, Kazakhstan is a member. So now, due to the Western sanctions on Russia after its annexation of Crimea in 2014, some EAU countries have been shifting eastwards to Asia for alternative economic opportunities. And of course, China is the main primary country, but of course, other countries like in Southeast Asia are also attractive for them. And Vietnam was the first ASEAN country to sign an FTA with the EAU in 2015. And this led to an increase in trade, a significant increase in trade between Kazakhstan and Vietnam. And bilateral trade in 2017 increased by nearly 50%, reaching about $550 million US. Now, recently, Singapore has become the second ASEAN country to sign an FTA with the EAU in 2019. So the other countries like Indonesia, Cambodia, and Thailand have all signed a memorandum of cooperation with the Eurasian Economic Commission, which is the EAU's regulatory body. And they all aim to conclude an FTA with the EAU later. The EAU and ASEAN has also signed an MOU on cooperation in 2018 with the hope of concluding an FTA in the future. Thirdly, Kazakhstan's central land bridge role and position in China's Belt and Road Initiative is also opening up greater opportunities for increasing economic and trade links with ASEAN, as it helps overcome the main obstacles to trade, which is the lack of economical transport and logistics links between Kazakhstan and Southeast Asia. The implementation of Kazakhstan's Nulizhou Infrastructure Development Program has meant that Kazakhstan has the most developed transport and logistics infrastructure in the region. And this is closely linked with China's BRI, of course. And Vietnam has already used Kazakhstan's logistics terminal in China's Lianyungang port, as well as the railway connection from Vietnam to Kazakhstan through China, and the Caucasus Dry port on the border with China to transport its goods to Kazakhstan and onwards to Europe. And Kazakhstan itself has also used this route to export its goods, including wheat, which is a major exporter of, to the ASEAN market. And goods transported between Europe and ASEAN through this route delivered at least twice as fast as via the Indian Ocean. So this saves both time and money. Fourth point is that ASEAN can prove to be one alternative economic and political partner in Kazakhstan's multi-vector foreign policy. So it can potentially provide some balance and diversification in Kazakhstan's foreign relations. The need for strengthening relations with ASEAN and its member countries was also mentioned in Kazakhstan's new foreign policy concept for 2020 to 2030. And from a geoeconomics point of view, some Kazakhstani experts have welcomed a greater economic role for ASEAN as one potential counterweight to Chinese economic influence, and particularly when ASEAN countries are viewed more positively in general than China. Kazakhstan also sees ASEAN countries as new sources for technology and expertise in areas such as agriculture, the halal food industry, Islamic banking, smart cities, education and training, hospitality and tourism, information and communication technologies, and the medical industry. Fifthly, Kazakhstan sees some ASEAN countries as successful political and economic role models to emulate. And this is especially true for the so-called Asian tigers like Singapore and Malaysia. Singapore's Lee Kuan Yew, as well as Malaysia's Mahathir Mohamad, were well regarded by Kazakhstan's leaders and elites. And the close relations between Lee Kuan Yew and Kazakhstan's first president Nazarbayev formed the backdrop for the very close relations between the two countries now. Now, Kazakhstan has in fact followed Singapore's example in several ways, such as the focus on economy first and politics second, as well as the establishment of the Samruk Kasina Wealth Management Fund, which is based on Singapore's Temasek, as well as the establishment of Bolashak scholarships for gifted students. So cooperation in education and training has also been very extensive and intensive, with close links between the two countries' major educational institutes. Sixthly, Kazakhstan has recognized the importance of greater engagement with ASEAN, as it plays a leading role, as the ambassador of Indonesia said, the driving seat of Asia-Pacific regional integration, and the formation of regional institutions such as the AIF, APEC, and the East Asian Summit. ASEAN is also seen as important as an access point for Kazakhstan to greater political and economic integration in the dynamically growing Asia-Pacific region. And it's tried to join the AIF, the ASEAN Regional Forum, and become an ASEAN dialogue partner, but it hasn't been successful so far, primarily due to a moratorium on new members, and also the lack of substantive economic ties. It has also tried to forge cooperation between ASEAN and SCO and ZICA, in which Kazakhstan is either a member of or initiated, And President Nazarbayev had also floated the idea of a C5+1 dialogue format between the 5 Central Asian states and ASEAN, though this has yet to be fully pursued. My last point is that the ASEAN experience is viewed as a useful model for Central Asian regionalism due to similar composition of small, medium states facing common regional challenges, not least the withstanding pressure from external powers in the regions. Now, ASEAN soft regionalism, which is with a focus on consensus and consultation, rather than on formal integration in institutionalization, as in the EU's case, is also seen as a perhaps more appropriate model for Central Asia. And in 1993, President Nazarbayev himself had also proposed the creation of a Central Asian Union, similar to that of ASEAN. But as the ambassador of Indonesia mentioned, exclusive Central Asian regionalism has so far been unsuccessful, and is often dictated instead by the great powers of Russia and China, and also hampered by intra-regional rivalry and suspicion. But with the new change in the new president in Uzbekistan, and we've witnessed 2 summits already between Central Asian leaders. Uzbekistan is opening up under the new president. And so there's some promising signs of greater future regional cooperation within Central Asia without the involvement of other great powers. To conclude, why the COVID-19 pandemic has adversely affected the global economy, both Kazakhstan and ASEAN sees opportunities in each other in this post-COVID world. And on the assumption of Kazakhstan's presidency of the Eurasian Economic Union at the end of last year, President Tokayev noted that the post-pandemic economic future lies in Asia, which of course would include ASEAN countries. Kazakhstan has also stepped up its economic diplomacy and introduced measures to enhance its attractiveness for foreign investors amidst the pandemic. The governor of the Astana International Financial Center has also espoused that partnerships with ASEAN countries are now more possible in a post-pandemic climate and even more necessary. Kazakhstan is the most advanced economy in Central Asia with the most developed infrastructure and central location and position as a financial hub is also likely to attract the greatest attention from ASEAN countries and businesses, and to also position itself as an entry point for ASEAN businesses and investors into the wider Central Asian market. So thank you very much for your attendance and attention, and I look forward to further discussion as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dr. Paradorn. Dr. Paradorn already provided us detailed empirical evidence, for example, trade link between Central Asia to Europe to Asian from the perspective of transportation and etc. But I would like to underline in his presentation that ASEAN experience as a useful model for Central Asian regionalism. Why? Both regions consisting of small and medium states facing similar regional challenge. So here from this discussion, we find that comparative regionalism is important to learn from each other. Thank you very much, Dr. Paradorn. So our agenda on keynote speaker already complete, but of course then we will hear further about issue on regionalism and international relation from 2 speakers, from Dr. Ikboljon Qoraboyev, and here also I would like to correct my spelling about M means that this is the university is not Muhammad, but Maksud Naribayev Kasku University. So my apologies about that, Shynar and Dr. Ikboljon. Now I invite Dr. Ikboljon Qoraboyev, Associate Professor of International Relations from Maksud Naribayev Kasku University. Time is yours, Dr. Ikboljon, please.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. Good day, good afternoon to everyone. to esteemed members of diplomacy community and university and research communities from across the world. So I'm very glad, I'm very happy to participate in such an event about regionalism, including Central Asian regionalism and ASEAN regionalism, because as a personally, like for quite some time, I have been studying regionalism in the examples of European Union, Central Asia, and also sometimes in the example of ASEAN. So that's why it's, I'm very happy, yes, to have another chance to speak about my topic of interest. But I also do believe that this kind of academic and scholarly gatherings, this kind of academic discourse, they directly contribute to advancement of practical regionalism. Yes, why? Because regions exist and so we talk about them, but sometimes regions exist because we do talk about them, because regions are constructed through discourse. And so today I will be speaking from scholarly perspective, so I will try to make a bridge between comparative regionalism literature and Central Asian and ASEAN models. So I will be using my, yeah, so just a moment. Okay, so it's okay, yes? Can you see my presentation? Okay. So I have given this kind of tentative title. So can we today speak about renewal of Central Asian regionalism and what lessons we can infer from the experience of ASEAN? So as it's evident from the title, the aim of this presentation is, first of all, to ask whether the idea of Central Asian regionalism, as separate from other kind of regionalism which exists in our region, but which involve not only our countries, but also external actors. So that's why I highlight Central Asian regionalism composed of, exclusively local Central Asian countries. And as such, whether this idea is still viable. And secondly, whether ASEAN experience is relevant for Central Asia. Regionalism debate in Central Asia, in fact, it is as old as our countries themselves in terms of course, contemporary political realities. Yes, so our countries, they accessed independence in 1991. And so the genealogy of contemporary Central Asian regionalism was born at the same time. It was already in 1989. During the Soviet Union, there were already meetings and discussions among 5 Soviet republics of Central Asia. And this framework continued also after the independence. And because it is such an important and such a constant feature in Central Asian regionalism, we can already give this kind of a list of quite a big number of arguments for supporting and promoting regionalism in and for Central Asia. These arguments are of both internal and external nature. So I have just quoted 2 scholars, one from the United Kingdom and another from Uzbekistan, Central Asia, which have described Central Asia as a coherent economic and security complex, as Annette Bohr stated in 2004, and Central Asia also as an objectively integrative unit with many aspects, in the words of Farhad Tolipov. And these arguments, they can be combined under 3 big categories, which also corresponds to major theoretical paradigms which have been guiding international relations debates and discussions through last decades. So we can distinguish constructivist arguments which believe that ideas, norms, and identities matter in foreign policy of states. In the context of Central Asian regionalism, we have a great number of policymakers, scholars, journalists, public figures, intellectuals who believe that Central Asian countries, they are part of one big whole. There is a very strong argument of unity, and this argument of unity is sustained by the history, by culture of our region. We have a strong regional identity, according to this constructivist argument. The second category of arguments, they can be affiliated with major liberal institutionalist paradigm, which believes that states can improve their domestic but also foreign standing through better distribution of information and by relying on institutional cooperation. In the example of Central Asia, we have many scholars, policymakers, but also especially international developmental agencies like Asian Development Bank, World Bank, and many other similar examples, which have been promoting the idea of Central Asian regional cooperation as an enabling instrument to help these newly independent countries to achieve smooth and successful transition. Yes, so it's a transition, a political transition from recent Soviet past to democratic, rule of law based modern societies. It is an economic transition from still Soviet heritage of planned economy to modern economy, etc., etc. So in many different discourses, but also in many different policy recommendations, reports, etc., etc., Central Asian regional framework is presented as a necessary framework to enable this transition. Yes, and also, for example, Central Asian region needs regional framework to manage regional public goods in terms of energy resources, in terms of regional security, etc., etc. And the third category of arguments, which fall under realism arguments, yes, and so realists, they believe that only power and material capabilities matter in international relations, and so state strategy calculations have to take into account and have to rely on realpolitik. Yes. Even from this perspective, we have scholars like Farhad Talipov who have been constantly calling the attention to the need for Central Asian regional cooperation because geopolitically we are obliged to be together all the time. Why? Because, like it has been already mentioned by esteemed ambassadors and Dr. Paradorn Rangsimaporn, that we are small countries entered, yes, surrounded by great powers. And in order to maintain our separate political and economic identity, we have to act together. Yes. And so as you see, we don't, we have a lot of arguments, yes, for Central Asian regionalism. In parallel to this discourse, yes, about the need for Central Asian regionalism, practical steps were also realized, yes, but of course with different scale of success. Why? Because regionalism, one meaning is state-led regional projects, yes, to redesign the region along certain specific political and economic features. So from this perspective, of course, Central Asia has been harboring empirically regionalism projects from 1991 to our days. But there have been more than one regionalism project. Yes. So on the one hand, we have these local endogenous is composed exclusively of Central Asian countries, which I call, and many of our colleagues, which we call Central Asian regionalism. But then we also have different kind of larger regionalism projects, like Russian-led economic and security regionalism, which involves Central Asian countries, or increasingly Chinese-led political and security regionalisms like Shanghai Cooperation Organization, or today we are speaking about Belt and Road Initiative, etc., etc. Yeah. So all these regionalisms, they exist, but Central Asian regionalism, this endogenous regionalism, institutionally, yes, formally, it exists for some time, but it stopped to exist in 2005. And so here I have just put you some institutions which embodied this Central Asian regionalism, but which stopped to exist in 2004. Why? Because the latest form of Central Asian regionalism, Sukoco, Central Asian Cooperation Organization, was merged with Russian-led Eurasian Economic Union, which is called today, yes. And from this moment, so as it was aptly put by Farhad Talipov, Central Asia ceased to exist as a quasi-political structure and institutionalized region. And so that's why we have this general opinion, general feeling that regionalism in Central Asia failed. Yes, so there is this constant and repetitive argument about the failure of Central Asian regionalism. And so the basic structure of this argument of the failure of Central Asian regionalism, it highlights that Central Asia is a region where it's problematic to create viable institutions due to its particular geopolitical and geostrategic position. Central Asia is always doomed to be a passive object of contentions and struggles for global primacy of sometimes mystical and teleological nature between great powers of the moment. So it can be British Empire and Russian Empire in 19th century, or it can be Soviet Union and United States in 20th century, or it is now Russia, China, and USA in 21st century. Yeah? And because of that, scholars from many different distinct epistemic communities reach generally similar conclusions about the impossibility of a viable Central Asian regionalism. Why? Because they say that there's no agency in Central Asian countries. They cannot act as independent actors in international politics. And there is no institutions, which means institutions, treaties, and agreements, they don't work, they cannot work in the region of Central Asia. Yeah? So there is this famous saying of Martin Spechler, who said that there exists a Central Asian non-cooperation pathology. And there's also an absence of culture of cooperation. Yes, so I have given here some scholars who have tried to explain why, you know, Central Asian regionalism is doomed to fail. Yes, so as you see, like I have given, for example, one example from 2000, like 21 years ago, Martin Spechler, who said there exists a regional non-cooperation pathology in Central Asia. Or we have a perspective of a Russian scholar who published about Central Asian security situation regionally in 2003, where he said that a complex economic, political, cultural, and ideological vacuum and the passive object of so-called the new great game. So this is the status of Central Asia. But even now we have more recent studies which are trying to understand and to explain the failure of Central Asian regionalism. And so we have the article which is called The Region That Isn't, which was published by Krapol and Vasilva Dienes, where they say that Central Asian countries have not managed to cooperate regionally and to integrate their economies because they are torn apart in the second great game. And we have a very fresh book of Vinokurov and Liebman, which came out from Central Asian program in the United States, which is called One Eurasia or Many, where they highlight the renewed interest in Central Asia, but still they feel a need to underline that it is almost impossible to reinvigorate Central Asian regionalism. Why? Because in spite of their alleged Silk Road past, Central Asian states have showed very limited ability to develop economic and political integration. And so that's why kind of Central Asian regionalism, was announced dead. But today, we can ask, was death of Central Asian regionalism announced prematurely? Was it exaggerated? Why? Because for the last 3-4 years, we are observing a renewed interest, scholarly interest, journalistic interest, but also we are witnessing renewed empirical attempts to reinvigorate regional cooperative framework or to increase regionalization among Central Asian countries. And so some facts which support this argument of renewed regionalism. So there is this new political environment, yes, so the change of leadership in Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, the two most important countries of the region, and then this renewed dynamics for regional cooperation, and as a consequence, renewal of Central Asian summits. But there's also increasingly consolidation of Central Asia +5 framework, where you have major actors, including Russia and China, but also USA, Japan, who are meeting Central Asian countries together. Yeah. And of course, regionalism globally is again becoming interesting. Why? Because we have this global project of China, which is BRI, yeah, and it has a lot of regional dynamics within its genes, and then politicization of Eurasian regionalism project, yeah, and already I have put some references of scholarly and policy research which have discussed this regionalism for Central Asia. And so I refer to Friedrich Ebert Foundation in Almaty's book on regionalization in Central Asia, strategy for Kazakhstan, or Chatham House in 2020. In their report on Kazakhstan, they have recommended Kazakhstan to increase its focus on promoting Central Asian regionalism. Or we have Cornell and Frederick Starr's, both scholarly but also policy recommendations to pay more attention to Central Asian regionalism. We have also discussed this together with my colleague Kairat Moldashev, or Tsai and Costa Buranelli's recent article, which sees that Central Asian regionalism would help Central Asian countries to accommodate, to balance this external regionalism. Yes, and so again we are back to this question of defending, promoting, but also about thinking how to better advance the cause of Central Asian regionalism. Why? Because of course, the sources of this new Central Asian regionalism debate, it's not only coming from the Central Asian region itself. Yeah, the nature of world politics today, it calls for renewal and readjustment of regionalism strategies. Yes, and so, for example, if you would ask what are the, in abstract, yes, the sources of regionalism debate. So regionalism is commanded by domestic and global political economy, yeah. But regionalism is also necessary to better fit with globalization, with global governance, and it's also commanded by changing configurations in the international system, but also because of regional identity. So let me just go to my last slide. Yes. Well, like I have tried to explain that we need to continue our focus on Central Asian regionalism. Yeah. The presence and the consolidation of Eurasian regionalism or Chinese-led regionalism is not a preventive factor to speak about, but also to practice Central Asian regionalism, yes, in parallel to this existing regionalism initiatives. But in this renewed era of Central Asian regionalism, we can learn a lot from ASEAN example. Why? Because already our colleagues from Southeast Asia, they have showed that, in fact, example of ASEAN is relevant and useful for the region. But how? Why? Because ASEAN is today seen, universally as a successful and alternative model to intrusive and legalistic model of European Union. So basically, if you want to compare EU model, then you have to think about ASEAN model, and both of them, they exist, they are accounted for, they are recognized and accepted. And then ASEAN is also successful because of its ability to delineate Southeast Asia as an autonomous regional actor with its own regional identity, its own set of rules and norms for interstate behavior. And from scholarly works, we also know that ASEAN has been and is still very helpful to manage the region's relationship with great powers like China and United States. And ASEAN has been quite successful in its ability to propagate and ensure compliance with ASEAN norms. And increasingly, we see ASEAN positioning as a main dialogue partner in political and security issues in the region of Asia Pacific. And that ASEAN now is a constant participant and also promoter of interregionalism globally. And so there are, of course, many scholarly works which highlight, scrutinize, and explore ASEAN, yes, Shynar and others. But one name, yes, which has been very big scholarly impact in promoting ASEAN way, ASEAN model, is Amitav Acharya. Yeah? And so we know a lot about both, the empirical aspect of ASEAN, but its generalizable, aspects. Yes, so about ASEAN model, what other regions can take away from ASEAN example from the works of Amitav Acharya. Yeah. And looking at the works of Amitav Acharya or reading ASEAN experience through Amitav Acharya's prism, yes, we can distinguish that there are two main features of ASEAN regionalism, which one is soft regionalism, yeah, and then another one is soft institutionalism. So soft regionalism of ASEAN, yeah, is considered as soft, flexible, and less intrusive. Why? Because differently from European Union legalistic and intrusive and hard regionalism model, ASEAN focuses on informality. It avoids excessive institutionalization, and consensus-based decision-making is very important. Yes, and so that's why ASEAN countries, sometimes they take their time, and they are ready to wait until consensus is made, yes, before taking rash steps which would disturb the general mood in the region. And also, so for example, in Latin America, we also have this presidential regionalism, yes, where the regionalism happens, through the meetings of political leaders at the highest level. So it's also relevant for ASEAN. Yes, why? Because ASEAN is also a very important dialogue platform where ASEAN member countries can come together and discuss their common issues. And so as a result, ASEAN regionalism relies on soft institutions. Why? Because when we say that ASEAN is a flexible and soft model, it doesn't mean that it negates or it ignores and neglects institutions. No, institutions, norms, they exist in Central Asia, in ASEAN, Southeast Asia, but they exist more in the form of soft institutionalism, yes, and which relies on preference for informality, yeah, avoidance of institutionalism, as mentioned before, and importance of consensus building, importance of and value of interpersonal contact, and also importance of the process. Yes, the end product is important, yeah, but process is as important as well. Yes, process of dialogue, negotiating, and in touch, etc., etc. And as such, it's all like soft regionalism. If you look at the Oxford Handbook of Comparative Regionalism, published in 2016, this ASEAN model, yes, it takes a prominent place across this book as well. So because of that, so ASEAN model is relevant for Central Asia, right? Because from the perspective of global governance and globalization, regional in Central Asia and insights from ASEAN experience can help Central Asia to propose common positions and locally relevant solutions to challenges arising from global. And these challenges not only of material nature, they exist, but also there's a lot of problems related to identity, also to normative. And regionalism will also help Central Asian countries to forge their regional autonomy and regional resilience in an environment marked by presence of several great powers. And it's very important, especially in the context of weakening of so-called liberal international order and a rise of confrontational nature and great powers. And also Central Asian regionalism will also help our countries to manage regions' interactions with larger Eurasian regionalism. Yeah. And it would be shift of focus from regional integration to regionalism and regionalization. Why? Because we are not building structures for existing region, we must build a region, yes, even if it exists in our minds, but do more both practical but discursive steps to consolidate Central Asian region. And we have societal and non-state actors for region building. And we have to enhance existing, but also seek out new partnership for region building, both inside the region, in its immediate neighborhood, but also globally. And so that's why, for example, ASEAN could be a very meaningful partner for Central Asian region building. And this regionalism and regionalization effort should maintain and should nurture with international and regional initiatives and institutions. And also Central Asia must consolidate its participation in interregionalism. Yes, so CI 5+1 dialogue platforms, they could be even more enhanced, expanded, and continued. So thank you everyone for your attention.
Thank you, Associate Professor Ikboljon Qoraboyev. I think Professor Ikboljon provide us from review of Central Asian, and then he proposed a new regionalism. And in his proposal, one of the issue that we may consider is Southeast Asian model. Yeah, let's say to adopt as a regionalism model in Central Asia. Thank you, Associate Professor Ikboljon Qoraboyev. Now we move to the another perspective, and I believe a perspective from comparative constitution from Dr. Rosa as a lecturer in the field of comparative constitution. Dr. Rosa Ristawati, time is yours.
Thank you so much for the time. But before I start my presentation, allow me to send my respect and gratitude to His Excellency Bapak Rahmat Pramono, the Ambassador of Republic of Indonesia for Kazakhstan and Tajikistan, and then Dr. Paradorn Rangsimaporn, the Counselor and Deputy Head of Mission of Royal Thai Embassy in Nur Sultan. We have heard valuable experience from both of our keynote speaker. So as my previous colleague, Dr. Ikboljon, said that I would like to see from the perspective of the academic and academician and scholar. So what I'm going to present is I'm going to present about the ASEAN Comparative Constitutional, a regional constitutional dialogue in Southeast Asia. So this is about comparative study of the constitution of the ASEAN member state. So I would link it to what my colleague Dr. Ikboljon have as the keyword, regional identity. And also what Mr. Ambassador has already said, that we have a unique character, unique identity of ASEAN. So my presentation would have 5 points. The first is why we need comparative constitution of ASEAN member state. And then the second one is about my comparability aspect. So in my comparative constitution study, I have at least 3 comparability aspects, which is the first is the constitutional value, and I found it in the text of the 10 ASEAN constitution. And then the second one is the constitutional identity, which is I have 3 identity of the ethnicity, religion, and tradition. And then the third one is actually the most interesting point, is the commitment to the regional and international relation. So this is what I learned from Mr. Ambassador, that in ASEAN, we have a common traits. We have terrorism, we have the issue of natural disaster, we have the issue of climate change, we have many issues of regional that being common threats. So we need to work together in the regional cooperation. So in the end, I will come to my preliminary conclusion, because actually my presentation is a foundation for our research collaboration, which I initiate with my colleague, Dr. Ikboljon, as a research collaboration in this year's scheme of our research agenda. So I would begin with the question of why comparing the ASEAN member state constitution. So maybe Mr. Ambassador has already told us about how interesting is the ASEAN, the member state of ASEAN, also very interesting, because we have a diversity value. So the answer is the first, that ASEAN as a pivotal organization in Asia, of course. Maybe Dr. Paradorn has already also explained us how pivotal organization is ASEAN. And then ASEAN is a regional intergovernmental organization, consists of 10 countries in the Southeast Asia. And from the constitutional perspective, the 10 member states of the ASEAN has their own constitutional value setting or laid down in the constitution. And by doing comparative constitution, our purpose is about fulfilling the need to strengthen the cooperation among member states, because actually the constitution is the window for us to know exactly what is inside the country, and that we can cooperate by a regional cooperation against common threats that Mr. Ambassador has already explained to us. And comparative constitution in academic purpose is kind of a one way of another for starting a constitutional dialogue. So this is very important in academic perspective, because we need to expand our knowledge about other constitution and how they develop. And then the following purpose for comparing constitution of ASEAN member state is that we can learn each other the best constitutional practice, and we can learn how diversity is the value that each of the member states has. So these are what we want to do in the comparative constitution. As I mentioned, that the constitution is a basic document, reflect national identity of the state, and explain us as a window to us to look inside the country. And then we can identify and understand constitutional value of each of ASEAN member states, as well as maybe we can find the commonality, the common constitutional identity, which actually make it easier for us to collaboration. And that by learning each other, by understanding the value, we can help to minimize the conflict, the regional conflict, and maintaining stability of the region. So I begin with going back to the historical experience of the ASEAN member state. So maybe we have Dr. Paradorn here. So maybe if I'm mistake, if I'm not getting wrong, then Thailand has no experience of colonialism, right? So except Thailand, actually the 9 ASEAN member states, we had experience with European colonialism. And actually, what we do for writing a constitution, if we study the constitution, we can categorize the constitution of 9 Asian member states are the post-colony constitution. What does it mean? It means that, well, direct or indirectly, we adopt the European constitutionalism. Yeah, for example, like a universal value for human rights and other thing. And yeah, that's the historical background for the constitutional making for the 10 ASEAN member states. So I would begin with my 3 comparability aspects, which is the first is the basic national identity, consists of ideology, tradition, and religion value. And then the second one is the constitutional value, which I identified as the constitutionalism, rule of law, and democracy. And then the third one, as I mentioned, is I want to see how the Constitution provides the provision for the commitment to collaborate in the regional level and in the international level. So these are the basic identity for the 10 members, ASEAN member states. So as we see that the 4 out of 10 of the Asian member states are unitary state. Other than that, Malaysia is federal state. Yeah, Myanmar is federal state, and then they have a diversity of the in terms of form of government, which is Brunei. We know that Brunei, Malaysia, Thailand. Yeah, Thailand and then Cambodia, they have the monarchy system. So they preserve the monarchy system. And that it will impact to the what system of government they have. Yeah, most of the ASEAN member state has a parliamentary system. We do have Indonesia and Philippines having a presidential system. So that's actually there is like having impact to the political process in the regional level, yeah, the system of government. So here, what I found about the constitutional identity. So here I found that not all the constitution of ASEAN member states have a religion identity. Only Laos, Brunei Darussalam, Thailand, maybe Dr. Paradorn also want to give a feedback on it, and then Malaysia. But in the literature, we find that actually there is a scholar mentioning that the ASEAN member state constitution is mostly adapting the what we call it as the religion constitutionalism, because it's not explicitly mentioned about particular religion, but in the constitution they have what they explicitly mention about the God Almighty, and that's most of the scholars recognize it as the religion constitutionalism. So about the ethnicity identity, yeah, all of the constitution except Cambodia and Myanmar, they mention that they preserve the ethnicity. So I found it here as the commonality value for the constitution, because they have the commitment to preserve their ethnicity. They don't want to ruin with the ethnicity identity, so they want to preserve it. The last one of my comparative aspect is the commitment to regional and international cooperation, which is actually very important to collaboration against the common threat. As we know that geopolitically we have a common threat of terrorism, cybersecurity, what are mentioned by Mr. Ambassador. And then the current is the pandemic, of course. So actually, when I look at the 10 constitution, I found that all of the constitution has already provided an openness, a willingness to cooperate in the regional and international level. So this is actually very good, yeah, very good for regional collaboration, regional cooperation, yeah, for regionalism. This is very good because all of the constitution provide the commitment that they want to work together regionally and internationally. So I come to my last slide. So this is what I found. The first is that the ASEAN member states give opportunity for constitutional dialogue. Why? Because they open to the regional world. They open to the international world. They want to work together. And then the second one, there is a similar part. There is a similar part for adapting democracy and the rule of law, even though each of the country in ASEAN actually has their own perception, their own understanding about how they conduct democracy and rule of law within their state. And then last point, the last conclusion, the comparative constitution is very interesting because it provides a diversity constitutionalistic value. And what I learned from the EU constitutionalism, the ASEAN constitutionalism has a kind of regional relativism, which is actually showing the signature of each of ASEAN member states. So I leave my presentation here for having a discussion with all of the participants and all of the speaker. Thank you so much. I think the moderator still mute.
Thank you, Dr. Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you, Dr. Rosa. I think from the presentation Dr. Rosa, she convinced us to first look at the Constitution while we would like to initiate cooperation. So from the Constitution, find value of the state, and maybe her presentation, Central Asia, consider on how to expand collaboration with Southeast Asia. Ladies and gentlemen, since it is a scholarly debate or discussion, I would like to give an opportunity to the participant, to the respective guests and participant in this room to share his or her idea. And if you have a question or comment, please raise your hand. Raise your hand, and I will give you opportunity to speak to the in this forum. Please, anyone who would like to have comment or a question, please. I see here in the list of participants from name, I may recognize that many foreigners join here, maybe from Korea, also from Kazakhstan, maybe from the name, and also from I don't know where, but I recognize this name of participant from overseas. So please, if anyone has a question. I still waiting for participant. If you have your opinion or comment, please. No one has comment. Yes, I believe there is still no one. Indeed, that's it is more than 1.5 hour. But I would like to give floor to His Excellency Dr. Rahmat, and also then Dr. Paradorn to have comment, at least comment to have a comment or opinion about other speaker opinion. So you may respond idea from Ikboljon, from Rosa, and also from Dr. Paradorn and from His Excellency Mr. Ambassador. Please. I would like to give first chance to Mr. Ambassador, please. Please unmute for Mr. Ambassador.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, yes, we can.
Okay, yes. Well, thank you so much for giving me another opportunity to speak a little bit about the presentation by Mr. Paradorn, by Mr. Ikboljon, Rosa, and others, very substantial in their own rights. I think you have touched a very core issue of the regionalism in ASEAN and how we can collaborate with the Central Asian. Of course, for me, for myself, what is important is that as the ex-official, I would say, of ASEAN, I would like to also promote the works of ASEAN to others and to also collaborate with other regionalism in the other part of the world. As I mentioned earlier on my presentation, we are always open to collaborate, working together with existing regional organizations around the world, or perhaps also giving us the experience to other countries who wish to form a kind of a regional cooperation in their own region. In a way, Kazakhstan is quite interested to learn from us, because I know that for sure that I have spoken to some of the officials from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Kazakhstan who asked me a few things, important things about our experience in ASEAN, and I know from that conversation, and they are very much interested to learn a lot more on the process of ASEAN and also on the role of Indonesia in ASEAN. So this is something that we want to share with you. I believe in 2018, during Astana Club meetings or some form of that kind of formal dialogue, my former foreign minister of Indonesia, Mr. Marty Natalegawa, was also invited, and he was also telling me that they asked a few things about ASEAN in great detail, and he was asked to speak about this issue during that specific talk. This is a closed forum, so I don't know for sure the discussion, but he told me about the specific issue that they asked from the Kazakh part. So I know that you are interested in developing this kind of the regional organization, perhaps in the context of the dialogue plus 5 dialogue of the leaders of the Central Asian leaders, maybe in that context. But I'm sure that some kind of a serious thinking is going on this particular issue. So again, we are open to that, and we are willing to share whatever that we know about the our region and ASEAN as an organization, regional organization. Thank you.
Thank you. Terima kasih, Mr. Ambassador. Now, Dr. Paradorn, I give you opportunity to send your extend comment or opinion, please.
Hello, can you hear me? Thank you, Dr. Radian. Thank you for this second opportunity to share my views, and you know, as a diplomat from Thailand, which is also an ASEAN member country, and I have 2 hats. So one is to promote Thai-Kazakh diplomatic relations, but of course the embassy also covers Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan. So Central Asia in general. We hope the Thai embassy here hopes to promote better relations between Thailand and Central Asia in general. But also the second hat is of course an ASEAN one, and as the ambassador of Indonesia said, we're also here to promote ASEAN and Kazakhstan relations, as well as ASEAN Central Asian relations. And I see this forum with this webinar as one of the good starting points for us to collaborate between the 2 regions, and not specifically just Kazakhstan, but also Central Asia in general. And you know, we can share best practices, experiences. We had a lot of things in common, more than we know or recognize. And I think this forum, this webinar is a good starting point to exchange views and perspectives, especially on regionalism. And of course, as Professor Ikboljon rightly mentioned, the ASEAN model is very relevant for Central Asia. And I think it's more attractive in the sense that it's not a supranational body as the EU. It's not a hard institutionalism or regionalism. So there's some flexibility and within that, and I think Central Asian leaders are more feel more comfortable with that kind of model. So I fully agree with all what speakers here have all said today. And my point of view is that we need a lot more engagement between our two regions and also with Kazakhstan in general. And my feeling is that this is more of a personal policy proposal, and it's a C5+1. You have Central Asian leaders meeting or summits with even with China now recently, but before that with India, of course, was quite recent, and then the US and also with Japan. I think also with South Korea. So why not with ASEAN countries? It would be C5+1 as ASEAN, but 10 countries in a sense. And I think that would be a good dialogue format for us to push forward our common interests, our mutual interests, and maybe as a framework for cooperation, for more cooperation between us. And of course, the ASEAN model can be one point of further engagement and cooperation between Central Asia and ASEAN countries. And I do know that the Middle East Institute in the National University of Singapore, they hosted some Central Asian young leaders of Central Asia who went to Singapore to learn more about ASEAN and its experience, and with the hope of they might come back and perhaps pass this on or to emulate the ASEAN model in their own policy field or whatever. So there's some engagement at maybe the young generation level or not. But, I think we should engage more on this at the elite level, the policy making level, especially between our foreign ministries. Maybe this is something that we can explore further, this dialogue between, institutionalized dialogue between Central Asian states and ASEAN states. Okay, thank you very much. Thank
you. Thank you once again, Dr. Paradorn. Now I give opportunity to Dr. Ikboljon.
Thank you again, yes, for second chance. As I said, it was a great pleasure to not only talk, but to listen to different perspectives. And you see, just even from this kind of short, and kind of limited engagements, we can already see a wide variety of fields of both research, but also cooperation, which appears between Central Asia and ASEAN. Like Dr. Rosa Ristawati's research project on constitutionalism and regionalism and how they appear in the examples of Southeast Asia and Central Asia. It's very promising, and also it's very original. And we need, in fact, this kind of research more. Why? Because even if in Central Asia, regionalism was always part of the region, but the scholarly study, but also public and media discourse on regionalism is mostly limited to geopolitical analysis and geopolitical coverage, which even if it's interesting, useful, and important, but it does not do service to what's really going on and what real potential there is in the region. Yes, so that's why we have to include this kind of normative, we have to promote and encourage normative studies of regionalism in Central Asia and Southeast Asia separately, but also comparatively. Yeah. And also in relation to this, for example, ASEAN model was articulated and promoted especially through constructivist prism. Yes, constructivist theories of international relations. They have been very helpful, in fact, to change the discourse around ASEAN. Why? Because similarly to Central Asia, the realist discourse on ASEAN has always been quite unfriendly to, and also quite, let's say, accepting of ASEAN's existence. Yes, why? Because realists would always say that ASEAN is all about talk, blah, blah, blah. There's no real deal in ASEAN. Yeah? But then with Amitav Acharya's contributions, which shifted the balance from the end product to the process and proved that process is equally important. So these kind of constructivist paradigms were very helpful and useful in promoting today and also getting accepted ASEAN model as a valid model. So we need this kind of also constructivist approaches and also comparative approaches to Central Asia. Yeah, why? Because only these kind of realist paradigms cannot cover all those interesting things happening in Central Asia. Yeah, maybe we don't have this kind of Central Asian institutionalism as in Europe or North America or in Africa or in America, but we have a lot of ongoing and already proved their usefulness, a lot of regional projects of cooperation and interactions. So that's why I think this kind of cross-fertilization and greater engagement, both policy-wise but also scholarly-wise, is more than welcome, and it should be encouraged, and we'll be happy to participate in this process. So thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Rosa, you would like to use second chance, please?
Okay, thank you so much. So yes, a study about comparative constitution of the ASEAN member state is actually maybe quite new. This is so Dr. Ikboljon in that sense is very very clear to explain it. Compared to what the constitution in EU, they start the integration with comparing and make adjustment for the constitutionalism, constitutional value, constitutional identity. So they built up the EU, what they call it as the constitutional identity, to have the same answer for the European Union. But this is a big question that we have in ASEAN, whether we want to access as the ASEAN with the type of the European Union, or we are happy. We are happy to have this kind of ASEAN regionalism. That's the big question. And how about the future? Because this is also what we can learn from the EU, even though they have the commonality, even though they have the EU constitutionalism identity, but yeah, their union is not really that everlasting. So that's the question, whether we have to preserve our signature of each of ASEAN member states. I think this is also related to what in my chat, there is a question from Coco, Master Student of Psychology. Why some conflict in ASEAN states are not resolved with the help of the ASEAN organization itself, such as the conflict of Myanmar? Maybe from my my answer is that yeah, we know that ASEAN is very unique. At the beginning of the establishment of the ASEAN, we want to preserve the sovereignty of the state, and we want to put the sovereignty of the state, of each of the ASEAN member state, primary to other. So compared to EU, they have decreased their degree of the sovereignty. I think that's my answer to this question. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Rosa Ristawati. I think, ladies and gentlemen, we finally come to the end part of this seminar, and I see here we are almost 2 hours. So, and here in Indonesia, especially in East Java, now call for pray for Maghrib. Now, as we have many perspectives and multi-dimension approaches from all esteemed speakers, it would not be proper for me to conclude or to make a conclusion from this online discussion. I would like to thank so much to the honorable speaker, to His Excellency Mr. Ambassador Bapak Pramono, to Dr. Paradorn, Dr. Ikboljon, and Dr. Rosa Ristawati, and also Dr. Shynar from Kasku University. Thank you, especially for speaker for insightful ideas and views on the issue of regionalism. In academic atmosphere, I believe that this webinar will benefit and attract us to study on advancement of regionalism. For example, here in Ireland, we have a European Union studies for foreign students, but why then we don't have study on Central Asia? So we can always try to find and to seek an alternative study of regionalism. Hopefully the seminar will be beneficial for everybody, and please give applause for all honorable speaker and for you all. Thank you. I close this meeting. Stay healthy for all of you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a good day.
Thank you.
Terima kasih Pak Ambassador.
Terima kasih.
Paradorn, Ikboljon, Shynar, and everyone.
Paradorn. Thank you, Iqbal.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Terima kasih telah berkunjung secara virtual pada Sekolah Pascasarjana Universitas Airlangga. Kami berkomitmen untuk mengembangkan pemimpin yang transformatif. Berbeda dengan sekolah pascasarjana lain maupun program-program studi S2 dan S3 yang lain, kami melakukan inovasi dengan membuat Student Development Program. Kami membangun berdasarkan 9 kompetensi yang dihasilkan oleh Hey Group, yang menjadi ciri khas dari lulusan sekolah pascasarjana. Yang pertama adalah berkolaborasi, yang kedua memberikan solusi yang kreatif dan kreatif problem solving, dan seterusnya ada 9, dan itu bisa kita monitor, dan kita memang menyediakan program khusus agar lulusan-lulusan kami memang menjadi pemimpin yang transformatif dan membuat dunia lebih baik, menjadikan kami sebagai institusi yang berkelas dunia yang mengembangkan pemimpin transformatif dan berdampak bagi dunia yang lebih baik.
Sekolah Pasca Sarjana Universitas Airlangga berada di kampus B yang hadir sejak tahun 1982 dengan nama sebelumnya Fakultas Pasca Sarjana. Sekolah Pasca Sarjana merupakan sinergi lintas disiplin ilmu yang menjadi bagian penting UNAIR di dalam mempersiapkan generasi masa depan yang terampil dan berpengetahuan luas guna mewujudkan Indonesia yang adil dan beradab. Pada saat ini, Sekolah Pasca Sarjana UNAIR mengelola program magister dan program doktor yang bersifat multidisiplin. Saat ini program multidisiplin Sekolah Pasca Sarjana menyediakan program master seperti pengembangan SDM, imunologi, ilmu kepolisian, forensik, manajemen bencana, sains hukum dan pembangunan, manajemen bencana. Sementara untuk program doktor meliputi ilmu pengembangan SDM. Posisi program Pasca Sarjana UNAIR saat ini tampak menggembirakan. 5 dari 7 program studinya, sebanyak 71% terakreditasi A oleh Ban PT maupun LL.M PT Kes. Kondisi ini dilengkapi dengan rekognisi secara internasional dengan tergabungnya Magister Ilmu Forensik dengan AFSN, serta kerjasama sekolah pasca sarjana dengan melalui University of Sciences and Technology. Sekolah pasca sarjana mengembangkan jaringan eksternal dalam kepentingan akademik bersama perguruan tinggi seperti Jakob University Jerman, Kasgu University Kazakhstan, The University of Western Australia, National Cheng Kung University Taiwan, National Chiao Tung University Taiwan, Victoria University Australia, The University of Manchester Inggris, Maastricht University Belanda. Sementara kolaborasi juga terjalin bersama BKKBN, lembaga pemerintahan, pemerintahan daerah, dan provinsi. Dalam memaksimalkan kapasitas kegiatan di dalam program non-degree lewat Executive Learning Hub, sebuah unit di bawah koordinasi Direktur Sekolah Pasca Sarjana untuk memberikan layanan kepada para eksekutif, direktur, manajer di perusahaan untuk upgrade knowledge dan pengetahuan terkini. Alumni Universitas Airlangga mendapatkan offering khusus untuk kepesertaan di program ini. Kegiatan ini meliputi Academic Writing Academy, Change Management, perancangan peraturan perundang-undangan, pelatihan perancangan kontrak bisnis dan kontrak publik, pelatihan aspek hukum, pengadaan barang jasa, dan pemanfaatan barang pada BUMN/BUMD, pengembangan kapasitas legislatif, pelatihan penyelesaian sengketa alternatif dalam sengketa bisnis.
Jadi leadership ini tidak saja leadership lulusan dari pasca, tapi juga membranding baru terhadap leadership nasional. Jualan kita, ya.
Kami berharap UNER bisa bersama-sama Banyuwangi untuk menjadikan Banyuwangi sebagai laboratorium beberapa bidang yang mungkin bermanfaat untuk masyarakat Indonesia.
Yang kita butuhkan sekarang ini adalah sinergi. Oleh karena itu yang harus kita perkuat adalah daya sinergi. Jangan lagi kita terfokus ke daya saing gitu. Lebih baik mahasiswa kita, peneliti kita bangun kemampuan membangun sinergi dengan jaringan yang semakin luas jaringannya, itu akan semakin kuat kita.
Sudah saatnya Indonesia ini punya jurnal yang berskala internasional sendiri. Jadi kita tidak lagi tergantung kepada jurnal-jurnal yang dimuat di media-media luar itu. Coba bayangkan berapa banyaknya penelitian dan lembaga penelitian kita yang ada di Indonesia. Mulai dari perguruan tinggi sampai lembaga pemerintahan non-kementerian. Kita punya LIPI, kita punya LAPAN, kita punya BPPT. Nah, sehingga dengan punya satu badan atau lembaga jurnal penelitian sendiri, saya yakin nanti luar negeri akan mengakses hasil-hasil penelitian kita.
Saya sudah mulai mengkampanyekan bahwa di UNER pun ada kajian ilmu kepolisian, dan ini saya mempunyai satu tanggung jawab profesi bahwa ini harus dilanjutkan. Prof. Badri, mohon izin kami akan mendukung penuh kemajuan ini dan kami siap untuk membantu bagaimana adik-adik terutama yang ada di wilayah Jawa Timur ini untuk bisa mengikuti perkuliahan di kajian ilmu kepolisian, karena ini adalah satu peluang yang baik di mana hanya ada 3 di Indonesia ini dari UI, UNER dan PTIK.